Welcome back to another Service Management Leadership Podcast. I have a great guest for you, Akshay, Anand, who is an Axelos product ambassador, big ITIL guy. I say big ITIL guy. I mean, you are representing Axelos, Akshay, so that comes
big
with
both figuratively and literally, I think is
I understand. And it's great having you on because I enjoy talking shop. You and I have traded comments and posts, so it's great having you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to finally connect with you and to be part of tap into your network and have these conversations. I mean, when we were preparing for this call, I almost felt like, had we just hit record before we started talking, we would have probably had the podcast right there. So, this is take two. Hopefully my answers are a bit more polished now. And also, could I just say full marks for the pronunciation of my last name? I think that is the first time I have heard someone outside India pronounce my last name reasonably accurately. So full marks for you.
Well, thank you. And it's one of those things that with the name like Tefertiller, I'm desensitized to it all, and I grew up with the twin brothers, so I was answering to the wrong name half my life. And so I want to be sensitive to others where I'm insensitive. So enterprise service management, hot topic right now. And I say it's hot because of the tool side, the process side, and now ITIL 4. So it's super hot right now. And so to you, what is and what is not enterprise service management?
Wow, you started with the easy questions, clearly. All right. There's a lot to unpack here for me. I would say enterprise service management is an application of the basic principles of service management to describe how the internal functions within an enterprise can work more effectively, efficiently, provide a better experience, work more collaboratively, all these other good things that we've been talking about in the industry for a long, long time. So that's what I think it is. Now, I think there are some parallels to be drawn with IT service management, because we all had the same aspirations. A lot of us still have the same aspirations that IT will finally wake up to recognize what service management is. It's not just infrastructure management or service desk or any of these sorts of things. It's taking a service mindset and applying it across the organization. So again, you're working collaboratively, you're automating what can be automated. You're focused on value through the outcomes you're trying to create. So you're not hung up on process compliance necessarily, although process compliance clearly has a place in highly regulated environments and in other types of contexts, but you're very much focused on the outcomes and trying to find ways in which you can create delight effectively for your customers, whether they're internal customers or external to your organization. But this is a very cynical take for me, I know, being product ambassador for ITIL and all that, but I call it like I see it. IT is still very much in that sort of functional mentality. Yes. I am a network engineer. I am a storage engineer. I am a database architect. I am a whatever, right? They don't necessarily see themselves as part of a service organization or part of a service team. And just because they've implemented a tool which is marketed itself as an ITSM tool does not make an ITSM team, right? There's a lot more that goes in there. ITIL 4 talks about, the 4 dimensions of service management. So it's not just the tools or the information you use. It's not just the processes. It's not just the relationships with third parties. It's not just how you've created your organization and the skills you have. It's about how you apply all of these to create the outcomes and not necessarily just focus on the outputs or, a silo of work without looking at things a bit more widely or holistically or whatever. And I fear that the same pattern is repeating itself in this space, which a lot of people are talking about, calling enterprise service management. We have a lot of people who say, well, we're putting in this particular tool set's HR module, or we've gone with what's it called? PeopleSoft? Was that the name of
Yes.
the tool? I don't know if it's still kicking around. Or we've gone with Salesforce, etc. Therefore, we're doing enterprise service management. And this is what I have the issue with, right? What you've got is enterprise workflow management.
Exactly.
You've not got enterprise service management. And it's the same way I would tell an IT team, just because you're using this tool doesn't mean you're doing IT service management, you're doing IT workflow management. For me, the big cultural step, which I don't see in 99.9% of organizations, is the finance team going to its stakeholders, the users of its quote unquote service, and saying, so how did we do? How can we do better? How can we make your life better in submitting that business case, in budgeting for next year's activities or next cycle's activities? The HR team going in and saying, how can we help you with succession planning? What are your business goals, whatever the team might be? What are your business goals for the next cycle? What sort of skills and capacity of those skills are you looking for? How can we help you achieve those outcomes so you in turn can achieve the outcomes of business has set upon you? Now, you know, my wife has worked for a number of tech firms, large global tech firms based out in California. And you know, she talks about a lot of these activities happening, but it's not commonplace. It's right. 0.01% of companies around the world, you know, are having those types of conversations, and we need more of that. So for me, enterprise service management is truly moving to a service mindset within the enterprise. It's not just about throwing in a tool and saying we're doing ESM. Sorry, this is a major soapbox moment for me, and I will keep going unless you stop me, Jeffrey.
It's awesome, and I want to repackage a little bit of what you said in my common vernacular, less polished. Is you can't have enterprise service management unless you have enterprise CIs in your CMDB. You can't have IT only CIs and assets and call that enterprise service management, much less the workflows and everything else. And you're taking it to a step even further than that and saying you can't call it enterprise service management unless every group that uses that functionality is creating services of their own. Is that fair?
Well, I mean, there is a data element to it, and yes, you need to make sure, for example, your CMDB also lists your business functions, your business services, other sort of internal services, HR, finance, etc., etc. So you can do that mapping and use that mapping for impact analysis and all that sort of stuff, and that gets you part of the way. But again, I come back to that 4 dimensions model as a framing device, right? The CMDB, as important as we say it is but one component in a dimension called information and technology. Mm-hmm. There's also the skills to use the CMDB and to use it wisely, right? With great power comes great responsibility, all that sort of stuff. Stanley, RIP. But so it's the right sort of skills to use that information, to maintain that information. It's the right sort of procedures to maintain that information, but then how are you actually using it to create better business outcomes? What are you doing with that? How are you actually consuming that CI data? So it's not just about having the data there. You could create a perfect representation and of your enterprise estate or IT estate and spend a lot of energy maintaining that and keeping it pristine. But what are you actually doing with it?
Right. Are you creating business outcomes, right? Or exactly. By creating, let's say, co-creation, I told speak, but I get you. But what always bugs me, and this is, we each have our soapbox, is that an organization puts in an enterprise service management tool that only cares about IT CIs, and they call it enterprise service management. And I'm like, oh no, until you have those conversations and say, okay, what kind of outcomes are we talking about that we need from here? You mentioned the 4 dimensions, then we can't call it enterprise service management. So we talked about what it is and what it isn't. If we want to make progress in the direction of enterprise service management, we want to take steps. How would we go about taking those incremental steps? Because I don't think it's one big step. I think it's incremental.
Absolutely. Now, you know, I certainly think putting in that tool is a good step. Is it the first step? Is it somewhere along the journey? That's up to debate. And I think depending on your context, you may feel like, my HR team is using a shared mailbox, but we've grown in size and that shared mailbox solution doesn't scale as we thought it would. So we need to put in some sort of enterprise grade tooling to be able to handle all the requests coming in, et cetera, et cetera. So, IT is going through its own mini digital transformation, for lack of a better word, right? They're using certain tools to create significant improvements in how they realize their own outcomes and outcomes for the rest of the organization. So in some cases, maybe a tool implementation is the first step. But then I would say a lot of organizations stop there, and they shouldn't be stopping there, right? They should be then looking at the data that the tool is producing and saying, all right, so I'll take HR again. All right, from the point that a manager comes to us and says, here's a job spec, we need to be able to find somebody because I have this business need. Let's track that value stream or that flow of activities from the point at which we recognize that we need some either capacity or new skills, to the point where value has been co-created, i.e. that employees at their desk, they've been kitted up, they are producing value from day one. What does that flow of activity look like? And what does the data tell us about how much time we're spending at each step and the success or failure rates of each step, right? So you could say, well, the first step is to put it up on all the job websites, including our own. And we wait for 60 days. This is what the data tells us in terms of how many people register interest in the first week, in the first fortnight, in the first month. So we can see that there's a tail off after the first month. All right, so let's make the process a little bit more efficient and close that off after a month rather than leaving it open for 3 months, right? So you're doing something with the data to make the flow more efficient, more effective. You're shortening the time to market is not necessarily the right phrase here, time to value. Right. You're shortening the time to value, which means the organization can realize that value a lot quicker, and you're providing that return on the investment that the organization is making in that department. So if you want to start with the tool, that's fine. Don't stop with the tool. Right. And it's the same with ITSM. You want to throw in any of these ITSM tools, brilliant. You're tracking your incident tickets, you're tracking your requests, but what are you actually doing beyond the basic fulfillment of that demand? How are you looking at the data then and saying, well, okay, how can we make this more efficient? How can we make it a better experience for all involved, et cetera, et cetera? I'm with you. In some cases, it might not start with the tool. You could say that, look, again, going back to HR, maybe that's the dog I love to kick, as the saying goes, but HR could say, look, from here on out, we will not be handling inquiries about payroll, right? We used to, but we're not going to. So what are they doing there? They're actually starting from a service portfolio point of view and saying, this is what HR is going to do. And we've agreed with somebody else in the organization that they're going to be picking up the stuff that we don't want to be doing anymore. Right. So now you're narrowing down the scope of what you're doing. You can then say, okay, we're going to be responding to holiday logging requests. How quickly do we need to respond to those? So you're then going from service portfolio to service level management. Maybe at that point you go into service catalog, because then you start to set up a self-service portal, and that's where tooling comes in. So everybody's journey is different. And I used to talk about this about 4 years ago. One of the anti-patterns in our industry is a lot of very well-intentioned and well-meaning people saying, here's our quick start methodology. You start with incident, then go to problem, then go to change, throw in a bit of CMDB. And it might work for more than half the population that they're working with, but some people might need to start with service level management. Some people might need to start with change enablement. Right. Everybody's journey is different.
Yes. And that is one of my beefs with the tool implementers, is that they see it the same every time in different organizations. And my first start is, okay, what made you implement, want a tool? Whatever that driver is, that's, is it audit and risk? Okay, let's address it. Is it tracking all of our assets? Let's address that. Every organization is so unique that it's hard to, especially in today's world, have a one size fits even most mentality.
Absolutely. I'd point to the ITIL 4 guiding principle. I know I'm throwing a lot of ITIL stuff here,
It's
but
all right.
ITIL ambassador here. But there's a guiding principle in ITIL 4 which says optimize then automate, right? There's too much focus on the then automate,
Yes.
and not enough focus necessarily on the optimize, because once you ask the question, what can we do to optimize the workflows that this service executes? Then you start to say, well, what outcomes are we trying to create? What outcomes are we trying to avoid? Who do we need to collaborate with? Who do we need to communicate with? You start to build out a much bigger picture of what it is you need to do. And then you can say, all right, that bit can be automated, that bit can be automated. But this one, although we can automate it, for now, we're going to hold off because we still need to get a better grip on how this whole thing works, yada, yada, yada. So yeah, optimization I feel should not really be the starting point, but unfortunately it is in a lot of cases.
Oh yes, just like process improvement kind of stuff. Let's put those people over there. And the automation part, it strikes a chord with me because I love automation. I think whatever we can do, the better. But then I worked with the gentleman, won't say the name, won't say the company, but he was pretty high up at a company that we were peers at. And he said, we have this problem with decommissioning process. It was whatever we can't automate, I don't want to do. And I was like, oh no, we have to say, okay, here's our 10 things. Let's automate what we can. And then if it's manual for the other 3 or 4 for the next 6 months, so be it. But you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think when it comes to ESM, to bring this back around to your first question, I think a lot of, again, very well-meaning companies and practitioners are going in with the message of implement this tool or implement this process, and you're doing enterprise service management. And okay, maybe it's like a level 0 of what it means to be enterprise service management. Moment you can coach the users of that tool, the managers, the sponsors, the customers, again, of that tool, to say, what are you actually doing with the data that's coming out of this? How are you improving not just your team or your department, but how are you improving how that department supports the overall business outcomes? Are you reaching out to say, how did we do? How can we do better? Because again, not everything can be quantified, right? And there's a danger to over quantifying things and then making them targets, right? Goodhart law kicks in, and suddenly your measures are not worth it, right? Because you're gaming the system to meet the targets. So a lot of it is down to sort of very complex social dynamics, political dynamics, all these sorts of things. That's when you start to tackle that messiness. That's when you're taking your first steps into enterprise service management. Star Wars quote, you're taking your first step into a larger world kind of thing, right?
Oh yes, and I'm right there with you, because I feel the same way with organizations trying to make that move towards ITIL 4 from their ITIL v3. You can't do it all at once. Every organization's different, with different SMEs, different v3 processes, different leadership. We're getting into a world where there's no, I don't want to be arbitrary, there's no one size fits most. I mean, and it's going, my view, and I'd like your opinion on this, but it's going to help those who really know their stuff shine better, because it'll be more obvious as time goes on who does it, who isn't as well versed.
That's interesting. That's a very interesting comment, Jeffrey. There was a book I remember reading as a couple of decades ago. Now, I had no idea about the author or his political leanings or whatever. It just seemed like a cool title of the book, and I think I've certainly picked up a lot of interesting lessons from it. The book is called Machiavelli on Modern Leadership. The name of the writer escapes me, but I think he was a correspondent for the Washington Post or one of these sort of newspapers. But one of the lessons he draws out is that leaders are successful only in a particular context, a particular time or a particular period of a nation's history where that nation is tackling certain challenges. leaders will emerge to shine. But once that context goes away, that style of leadership, that style of management, if I can say that, is no longer fit for purpose. And that leader is now, people turn on that leader, that he's removed from power, all these sorts of things, right? We can see it time and time and time again. But I think the same is also true for modern organizational theory, if you will, that, in this sort of complex world, yes, those certain SMEs, subject matter experts who are able to pick up and move with these new frameworks have the opportunity to shine, but they also need to be aware that the moment the context changes,
Yes.
that same framework is no longer going to serve them as well as it did, and they might then be labeled as the next dinosaur to be removed from the workplace, right? So there is a slight danger to over-indexing, if that's the right term, on some of these frameworks and methods and so on.
I'm right there with you, because I feel like that's where a lot of the consulting, the noise I hear is all V3 based, and they're talking about it in ITIL4 concept in context. And to me, my brain can't fathom, the way that that's being used. And I only meant it was, we're in this time of transition in our world in so many ways, like I feel like we're in this big transition in a lot of ways. And I think that there will be certain people that have the understanding and the leadership to get us there. And there'll be others who are wanting to, but just can't. And so anyway, that's just my view of it.
Well, I mean, if you look at, so I was in my mid-20s, I'm probably dating myself at this point, but I was in my mid-20s when we shifted from ITIL v2 to ITIL v3. And that was what, 2006 was when the transition started. 2007 it was first published, but the sort of transition kind of started around 2006, I think. But as of 2010, you still saw references to service support and service delivery, which were V2 terms, which was okay. But the world eventually moved on to version 3. I think we will see organizations and practitioners make that transition to ITIL 4. My hope is that it doesn't take as long as it did for V2 to switch over to V3, because again, the world is constantly changing, and we need that sort of principles-based approach rather than adherence to process and all these sorts of over-indexing on any one particular framework. We need that sort of principles-based approach. So I hope that people recognize that what got us here won't get us there, is I think the phrase that I've heard.
Yes.
The other thing I'd say is, I see a lot of people talking about, complexity thinking and complex systems and all that, which absolutely delights me. I'm not an expert in that field of science. I'm certainly a fan. But I think one of the things that I've seen, which in my mind is incorrect, is people saying, well, we can't predict anything, which is a bit clickbaity for me, right? Because complex systems also have what's called dispositionality. They are disposed to behaving in a certain way. So we can't predict with absolute certainty that if we make this change to our self-service portal, we're going to drive up engagement with that portal and we'll have more tickets coming in through the portal. We might have the opposite effect, but the balance of probability says that we might be able to achieve what we want. But even within that system that you're examining, some aspects of it are unpredictable or relatively unpredictable, but some aspects of it, like the workflows you've built into your self-service portal, are absolutely predictable. Right. So we also need to understand that there are some things which cannot necessarily be predicted ahead of time with absolute certainty. But even when you delve into that, you will find kind of like, one of those sort of fractal images, you will find the same sort of thing. Something that's inherently complex can be broken up into things which are predictable, as well as other subsystems which are complex. So we also need to have a better understanding of how the world works, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just, I think IT has too much of that engineering mentality, which is, if I press this button, I'm guaranteed with that result. And we then apply that same thinking to people.
Yes.
Which is horrible.
It's a binary thought, right? Like it's like a light switch that it's either on or off. And You know, if I ask you how your day was, it's probably neither a 0 or a 10 on 1 to 10. Each day in different parts are on a spectrum, and that's the lens we should see it. Where I was going, and you'll laugh at this, is there's somebody who I was connected to at LinkedIn before this was arguing the point that the tool, the place of the ITSM tool was the same when it went from V2 to V3 as it is now. And I was like, no, the whole world's changed. And you know, it's just one of those things that it's constantly changing. The role of everything is constantly changing. But you're right, there are some things that stay the same that we can lock onto as a basis of projecting certain outcomes, right?
Absolutely. Let's take incident management, right? At its core, incident management has been the same. It has been for the last 30 years, right? At its core, you're trying to fix issues that are creating a loss of productivity or loss of revenue or whatever it might be. But if you cut into that a little bit more, you still have tools, you still have predictable workflows, but you now have new social dynamics, you know, things like swarming coming in, which are a completely new way from the previous tiered hierarchical system of escalations and so on. So you also have new techniques, new approaches, which reflect the way in which modern organizations work. So I'm completely with you there.
Yeah, everything's changing. No matter how young or how old you are, the rules are changing, and it's okay. It's just up to us to know it well enough to be able to help everything keep going. So we've talked a lot about enterprise service management. I want to switch just a little bit. In ITIL 4, there's a prominent role for governance and continual improvement. Continual improvement is all over ITIL 4. And so is there a relationship between those two? And I say that because governance and continual improvement, sometimes they're fighting for the same resources, but in an organization, what's the relationship in the ITIL 4 context?
Okay, so continual improvement appears at a few different levels in the sort of architecture of ITIL 4, as you just said, Jeffrey. So the lowest level at which it appears is the continual improvement model, stuff that, you know, the model that we were familiar with back in V3 days, of course. I forget off the top of my head if it appeared in ITIL V2, but it was certainly, you know, it had a whole book to itself in ITIL version 3. We made a slight tweak because a lot of us snickered and said, well, it doesn't actually say do anything. It just says, you know, where do we want to be? Did we get there? Well, when did you actually make a change? So we added an extra step just to make that clear. But that's the lowest level. On top, the next level up would be continual improvement as a practice, which is how does the organization as a whole use the resources at its disposal to make these improvements to any aspect of the organization. It's other practices, so, you know, other, skills, contracts with suppliers, procedures, improve the data that it manages or the tools that it uses, etc. So continual improvement at that level as a practice applies to sort of all the other practices that are going on. And then there's the service value system, where I think we also have continual improvement at a very interestingly, as a peer, if you will, of guiding principles, governance, the set of practices, and the service value chain and value streams, of course. And I think the interesting thing there is that what we're saying is that continual improvement is as important to an organization as governance itself, right? I feel that too many organizations think that continual improvement is about, well, if we tweak this workflow, we'll be able to, you know, complete it in 15% less time. But improvement at the SVS level is basically saying everything in your organization can be improved. The way you make decisions, i.e. the guiding principles, the way you're behaving, making decisions, that can be improved. The way in which you are evaluating, directing, and monitoring your organization can be improved. The way you're setting the top level goals and then reporting against it and improving your strategy, that governance itself can be improved. And this is a thing that a lot of people miss, I think, because governance is so far removed in many organizations from the people who are actually executing it. I mean, there's obviously that strong synergy, strong link between the board of directors or the board of governors and the executive team. But the more degrees of separation you introduce, the more governance is seen as the bureaucracy, the thing that's slowing things down. Partly because I think governance doesn't do itself any favors. It presents itself as a stick rather than a carrot,
right?
In almost all cases, right?
Yeah.
If you do this, you will be fired. That kind of mentality. But governance itself can be improved. How does governance work in the age of agile? And not just capital A agile for software development, but small a agile as in organizational resilience. How do we make sure we stay nimble enough that we are still focused on that top level goal, but we're not so married to the sort of top level KPIs and metrics, etc., that typically a board of governors looks at. So what we're trying to say at the SVS level is even governance can be improved, and even governance can be changed.
Yes.
And I think that's a message that a lot of people miss. That's why for me, continual improvement is a strategic tool, not just a tactical or operational tool.
So two things, and I think you and I are, so one thing that's, I don't want to say ironic to me, but your improvement needs governance and your governance needs improvement. And those are not mutually exclusive, right?
Correct.
And it's funny that everybody thinks of them as siloed. The other thing that I don't like that most organizations are set up this way is that they have governance as a separate team set off in somewhere else, and improvement set off as a separate team. And I take ITIL forward to say, hey, these are areas that need to permeate everything you do so you can co-create better value. You can understand your customers' demands and opportunities better, so on and so forth. Does that seem reasonable?
Absolutely. I think one of the great disappointments for me, being not just a practitioner, but like an industry watcher for the last God knows how many years, is I thought that the service lifecycle was a half decent model. I mean, sure, we could have quibbled about what's happening between design and transition. Why isn't there a build, for example, right? There were some quibbles, but as an operating model, I think it was presented in the best with the best possible intentions. How it was adopted was it became an operating model, and I think that's one of the greatest shames that we failed as an industry to correct. And so you have silos of service strategy teams and service design teams and transition teams and operation teams, and yes, continual improvement teams. And believe it or not, Jeffrey, I think about 7, 8 years ago, I think it was, I'd been made redundant from one job and I was looking around for another job, enjoying my payout and all that sort of stuff. And I remember somebody sent me a continual improvement manager JD. And I had a thorough read through, said all the right things, looking at the data, interviewing stakeholders, identifying opportunities for improvement. But the thing it did not say was you will have, management responsibilities over the teams who need to make the change.
Right.
So effectively, you're someone who's just gathering the data, making the reports, pitching the idea, and hoping to woo over people who are already stressed enough on their day jobs. And all you have is scope of influence. You don't have scope of control.
Yes.
For me, that is possibly one of the most thankless jobs I can imagine anyone doing. Right.
I've been there, not in the improvement, but I've been there, and those are rough jobs. And I think many service management roles are that way.
Absolutely. But the reason that happened is because too many organizations adopted ITIL v3 as an organizational model rather than an operating model. Because had they taken it up as an operating model, they would have said, here's a service team. Now, you're all part of one team. So that guy, even though that guy might be, or girl over there might be looking at the data and suggesting opportunities for improve, it's the team who comes together to decide. And that's not just the operational team, that's the team,
right?
Capital T, who come together to decide, this is where we're going to be investing to improve. We'll take ideas from anywhere, we'll maybe we'll give priority to the ideas that have come in from this one person whose role it has been for the last cycle to look at the data and suggest these opportunities. But it's this team coming together. It's not just somebody off on the side trying to come to. I mean, I've been a project manager, and my God, I would never wish those sorts of environments on some of my worst enemies. All you can say is, guys, we need to be able to do this task by this day so that we can hit that milestone. And the people who are delivering are so overloaded, they can't take any additional requests or pivot quickly enough because they just don't have the capacity to do it. And it's the same thing with continual improvement management as a separate silo. I'm sure you must have a lot of listeners who work as continual improvement managers. I'm really sorry you guys had to hear that. I genuinely hope that you have a better experience than I have had. But the reality is many people are in these thankless positions.
Oh yeah. And they are doing great. Like I have said repeatedly on the podcast that it's one of the most thankless jobs within an organization throughout service management, including improvement, continual improvement. But also people don't go to college or don't go to school for these. Somebody fell into these jobs. We don't do a good job of equipping them. And I love the ITIL classes, but that doesn't equip you to do that day-to-day job. And I just don't think that these people are thrown into these jobs, and it's a tough thing.
Absolutely. And it's not just about, I like what you said about equipping them with the tools to do their job, but it's also empowering them with the right amount of authority to be able to get the job done.
Yes.
Right. So we might be sending people on training, but if they come back into a system, into an organization where they have no way of influencing other teams or no way of getting their jobs done, they're just spinning wheels.
Right. And I, as evidence, I would throw out the number of people that have been through ITIL foundations over the years, yet many organizations are still very immature. It's because we haven't done a good job of equipping people and empowering them to do good work, make change, because these are real dollars to an organization. How fast do we resolve incidents? Look at Facebook and the change enablement or change management issue. Take improvement opportunities. These are real dollars and real people's jobs. I would love to see them be successful.
Absolutely. I think, I'm going out on a limb here, wild speculation, but I think part of the issue is that not enough managers go on a ITSM course, and the M there stands for management. A lot of ITSM courses, ITIL Foundation included, are seen as entry-level training. And to an extent, that's true. It is foundational training, but it's also management training, right? And so what's the point in exciting somebody about the possibilities of newer, modern ways of working and ways in which they can not just have the joy of work, but the joy of working in those environments, if they're coming back to an environment where the manager says, no, you're going to do things exactly the way we've done before, and I don't care what you heard on that course, it doesn't matter here, right? How is that meaningful in any way? Right. What we should be doing is sending that manager on the course and helping that manager see the light in terms of, this is how you can make your team happier, more motivated, because they will deliver stronger results, which in turn will either save, if you're in a cost center, it will save your company money. If you're in a profit center, it will help drive more revenue and therefore more profit. It's the managers who need to go on these courses, not just entry-level stuff.
I had when I was a director of a large place, and my manager was like, no, we will continue, because one of my peers wanted it, but we will continue to do emergency changes through incidents. Another task. I was like, no, because you need it for this reason, and it's one of those that is very frustrating. And you brought up memories for me, but you are 100% correct in that it's tough in those day-to-day jobs. You think of the change manager that is trying to do the best for the organization, or the person in financial management trying to make sure that everything works, or incident resolution. Those are tough jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, a lot of this comes down to social dynamics, social cultures, the cultures of authority. So for example, in India, a lot of times it was, we do what the boss says, right? Now it's starting to change, but I suspect that sort of mentality still exists all over the world. It's not just an Indian phenomenon. And I've heard from a lot of trainers, consultants, practitioners who say, well, my boss doesn't want to go on this course because he thinks it's an entry-level course and he's earned his 10 years of seniority and his position, and why should he be like slumming it with people who are just out of university? And I was like, well,
Right.
but that's not the point. We need a growth mindset everywhere, not just in your junior staff. Managers need a growth mindset. They need to be open to learning new things as well.
We all do. I would say we all do. And, it's one of the things about this life that I want to continue to grow and learn, because I want to be able to offer the best guidance, or because the rules are changing, like even over 2 years ago, pre-COVID, everything's different now. I couldn't imagine today how different it'd be.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I was on another podcast, listening to another podcast where people were talking about COVID and how, things have radically changed. But I'm being very cynical here, I know, but I think there's a certain amount of elasticity that we've probably seen in these responses to COVID and the lockdown, that the moment lockdowns are lifted, we see organizations and managers behaving as Elastic does. They're snapping back to what they were comfortable with, for whatever reason. And I think that is possibly a bigger risk that we have to manage than the abrupt shift. I would say that elasticity is as big, if not bigger, a risk to our collective efforts to change the industry for the better.
There's a lot of moving parts, a lot, and knowing which ones are elastic and which ones are going to break and continue on is, I think, of the rubber band thought process. All right, Akshay, it's great having you on. Thank you for joining us. Is there any parting words you'd like to bestow on us?
My God, you're giving me another hour, I think. Then
that's all right.
All right. So the biggest thing I would say to everyone is think for yourself, right? I think we've had too many years where we do what we're told, and within reason, that sort of mentality, that sort of model works. It has context in which it can work. But that doesn't mean that we shut down our own thought processes. It doesn't mean we shut down our critical thinking as well. And so as a practitioner or operational level stuff, let me think about ways in which I can make my work better. As a manager, let me think about ways for myself in which I can make my team better, happier, more motivated, delivering the results quicker, easier, etc. Rather than saying, well, let's just copy the Spotify model because it worked for Spotify and look where they are now, right? Contexts differ, whether that's technical, you're using different technologies, you're in a different industry, you're in a different part of the world, there's a different culture, social culture at play, whatever it might be. So my biggest request to everyone listening to this podcast, and I'll keep saying this outside of the podcast as well, is think for yourself, right? Don't just copy something you've seen work elsewhere.
Right. And that was one of the themes in my book, is like everything's different. Like you cannot, people move into ITIL 4, you see me get all excited, is that leadership, even leadership risk aversion levels are different, which makes everything else different, or subject matter expertise in-house is different. That makes everything different. I mean, like it doesn't take that much to be different, to be enough different that you have to think for yourself and plant your own course.
Exactly. The other thing that, just to add to that and maybe round the thought off, is to also tell people that best practice is effectively decontextualized guidance. It is guidance that applies no matter where you are in the world, no matter what industry you are. It is the basic building blocks of something that is best practice. But the moment you pick up that best practice and say, right, we're going to use that here, and you start to change it, it no longer stays best practice. It becomes good practice or leading practice, or call it what you will, but it is not best practice. So also beware of people who come to you and say, we should be using best practice. You don't use best practice, you borrow from best practice, you adopt best practice, or you adapt best practice. But if you're using best practice, I would say something's seriously wrong and you should be watching out.
Or your house is going to look just like everybody else's, even though you have different needs. You know what I mean? Like you can't use the standard issue stuff because your organization has different needs, which needs you to adapt slightly here. It's kind of a recipe, I think. Same recipe in two different chefs' hands will taste different because they'll season it different. And that's how I heard you say that.
Absolutely. You can find, if you want the cooking metaphor, you can find a lot of blogs which talk about baking chocolate chip cookies. Yes. But if you vary the amount of white sugar versus brown sugar, you vary the amount of butter you add in, you vary the type of flour you use, you're going to get different looking cookies, which taste different as well.
And they're all good. I love cookies.
And they're all good.
I love cookies. Akshay, thank you for joining us. How can people get in touch with you if they're not already connected to you?
Sure. Great question. So on Twitter, I'm at Blowboy. That's BLOREBOY. Blow is an old time, like back in the 90s, we used to write B''LORE to mean Bangalore, which is the city I grew up in. So on Twitter, I'm at Blowboy. You can find me on LinkedIn /IN/Blowboy. Chances are, if you see at Blowboy on your social media channel, it's me. If you want to connect with me, more than happy to. Just make sure you include a note in the invite telling me why you want to connect with me. I get like 5 requests per day at this point with absolutely no context or explanation. Oh, here's a database engineer from Peru. Interesting, but I don't know why he wants to connect with me. So, decline. So just add a note, tell me what you want to connect, and I will accept the invite. I would also like to plug a really good forum on social media. I know not everybody uses Facebook, but there's a group called Back to ITSM, which is absolutely brilliant, really good conversations. It's moved far beyond the is a password reset an incident or a request type conversations, or how do I pass ITIL4 foundation type requests. We talk a lot about, there was a huge thread the other day about Rob England's standard plus case and whether, how we would describe it in an organization, or how we'd adopt it in an organization. Really, really interesting discussions there. And if you can, please join us there. We'd love to have you.
I'm not a Facebook person, so the outage meant nothing to me other than WhatsApp. But
it was a great social experiment to curb misinformation.
Or to tell those of us in service management world to be able to use for context for now you should be able to have more resources for your change management process or whatever, right? Akshay, thank you for joining us. We'll have you on again in the future, and hope you have a great day, sir.
I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you so much for having me on. I loved this conversation. Take care, everyone.
Bye.